Motivation always feels real in the beginning. You wake up early. Your mind feels clear. Everything seems possible. You tell yourself, this time is different, and for a few days, it is. Then something strange happens. The feeling fades. The energy drops. Resistance shows up out of nowhere, and you start asking the same old question. What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. Motivation was never meant to last. That's the part nobody tells you. Motivation is not fuel. It's a spark, and sparks don't burn forever. But you were taught to rely on it as if it should. You were told that successful people are always motivated, always driven, always hungry. So when your motivation disappears, you assume you're broken, lazy, undisciplined. But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. Motivation dies because it was never designed to carry weight. It shows up when things feel new, when outcomes feel exciting, when effort feels optional. The moment effort becomes repetitive, motivation leaves. That's not a flaw, that's biology. Your brain loves novelty. It hates repetition. Motivation feeds on novelty. Discipline feeds on identity. You've been trying to live on novelty forever. That's why you keep starting over. New plans, new routines, new bursts of energy. Same cycle. Because motivation doesn't survive friction. And real progress is nothing but friction, repeated daily. Here's the first truth most people miss. Motivation fades the moment reality replaces imagination. In the beginning, you imagine results, the confidence, the freedom, the praise. That imagination creates dopamine. Dopamine feels like motivation, but once you start doing the work, imagination disappears. Now there's effort, uncertainty, boredom, and dopamine drops. Your brain doesn't say, good job for being consistent. It says, this isn't fun anymore. So motivation leaves, not because you failed, but because the fantasy ended. You were motivated by an outcome you hadn't earned yet. Once earning begins, motivation is no longer invited. This is why motivation always abandons you at the same stage, right after the honeymoon phase, right when repetition begins, right when progress becomes quiet. You don't quit at the start. You quit after momentum feels ordinary. That's not coincidence. That's how motivation works. Here's the second truth. Motivation depends on emotion. Emotion is unstable. It changes with sleep, with stress, with feedback, with comparison. So any system that requires you to feel a certain way to function is fragile. You built your habits on mood. You work when you feel inspired. You rest when you don't. That sounds humane, but it guarantees inconsistency. High performers don't feel more motivated than you. They feel less controlled by emotion. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They ask, is this what I do? That's the difference. Motivation asks for permission. Identity gives commands, and identity doesn't fluctuate with mood. Now, let's talk about the real reason motivation disappears fast. Motivation dies when it meets uncertainty. At the beginning, you believe effort will pay off. You assume progress will be visible. You expect validation. Then days pass, sometimes weeks, and nothing obvious happens. No feedback, no applause, no reassurance, and motivation collapses. Because motivation needs evidence quickly. It doesn't tolerate delay, but everything meaningful in life has delayed feedback. Wealth, skill, strength, confidence, all of it lags. So motivation abandons the process long before results arrive. This is why motivation works best for things with instant payoff: cleaning your room, finishing a task, completing a checklist, and fails for everything long-term, because long-term progress is silent, and silence kills motivation. Here's the third truth. Motivation is selfish. It shows up for things that benefit you emotionally right now, not for things that benefit future you. Future you is abstract. Present emotion is real. So when motivation fades, you default to comfort, scrolling, snacking, distraction, rest without recovery. Because your brain wants relief, not growth, and motivation was never strong enough to fight that. You were asking it to do a job it was never designed for. Now, here's where most people get trapped. They think the solution is more motivation, better quotes, stronger hype, more intensity, so they chase the feeling again. New video, new plan, new burst, and the cycle repeats. This is addiction. Not to progress, to starting. Starting feels powerful. Continuing feels ordinary. So you restart over and over. Not because you don't want results, because you want the feeling. Motivation gives more than the discipline results require. This is why people have 10 unfinished goals and no completed transformations. Now let's talk about the lie you were sold. You just need to want it badly enough. That sentence ruins people because it implies that failure is lack of desire. It's not. It's lack of structure. Desire is cheap. Structure is expensive. Desire spikes. Structure holds. High performers don't rely on wanting. They rely on standards. Standards don't care how motivated you are. They only care what you do. Motivation says, I'll try today. Standards say, this happens whether I like it or not. That sounds harsh, but it's freeing because now you're not negotiating with your feelings every morning. Negotiation is exhausting. You think you're tired from work. You're tired from debating yourself. Motivation makes everything a debate. Should I? Can I? Is today the day? Identity ends the debate. Now let's talk about self-sabotage, because this is where motivation really fails you. Motivation loves big promises, big plans, big commitments. So you overcommit. You change too much at once. You try to become a new person overnight. And when you inevitably miss a day, motivation turns against you. You messed up, you're inconsistent. See? This never works. Motivation is fragile and judgmental. One mistake, and it leaves. Identity absorbs mistakes. Motivation says, you failed. Identity says, adjust and continue. That's why people who rely on motivation quit after small slips. And people who rely on standards don't. Now let's talk about the environment, because motivation hates hostile environments. If your environment is built for distraction, motivation can't survive. Notifications, noise, comfort everywhere. You're fighting a system designed to steal attention. Motivation is weak against systems. Systems beat willpower every time. So even if you feel motivated, your environment drains it. That's why you can feel inspired and still do nothing. You didn't remove friction. You tried to overpower it with feeling. That never works. Here's the most important truth so far. Motivation is not a cause of action. It's a result of action. You got it backwards. You wait to feel motivated to act. High performers act and let motivation catch up later. That's why they seem consistent. They don't wait for the feeling. They create it through movement. Action generates momentum. Momentum generates motivation. Motivation doesn't generate action. This inversion is why you feel stuck. You're waiting for the wrong thing. Now let's talk about the real cost. Every time you wait for motivation, you reinforce a habit. The habit of delay, the habit of hesitation, the habit of emotional dependency. Your brain learns, I only move when I feel like it. So when you don't feel like it, you don't move. That habit compounds. That's why motivation feels weaker over time. You trained your brain to ignore discomfort, not to push through it. This is why motivation never lasts for you. Not because you're special, because you're human. Motivation fades for everyone. The difference is what replaces it. For most people, nothing replaces it. So progress stops. For high performers, something else takes over. Because once motivation is gone, one thing must remain. And that thing decides everything. When motivation disappears, something takes its place. For most people, it's nothing. That's why progress stops. They don't fail. They just stall. And stalling feels safe. No risk, no embarrassment, no pressure, but also no growth. The people who keep going after motivation dies are not special. They just replace motivation with something stronger. Identity. Motivation asks, do I feel like this? Identity says, This is who I am, and who you are doesn't change every morning. That's the difference. Most people try to feel their way into action. High performers act their way into feeling. Once you understand this, motivation stops being important. You stop chasing it. You stop blaming its absence. You stop waiting for it to come back because you don't need it anymore. Here's the shift that changes everything. You stop asking, how do I stay motivated? And start asking, what does someone like me do when motivation is gone? That question forces identity, and identity creates standards. Standards are non-negotiable behaviors. They don't care how you feel. They don't care how tired you are. They don't care what happened yesterday. They only care what happens today. This is why standards work when motivation doesn't. They remove emotion from the equation. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel confident. You just need to follow the rule. And rules are easier than decisions. Decisions require energy. Rules conserve it. That's why disciplined people don't look intense. They look calm. There's no internal argument. The decision has already been made. Motivation creates arguments. Identity ends them. Now let's talk about why this feels uncomfortable at first. Because motivation lets you feel good before you earn results. Identity makes you work without emotional reward. No hype, no excitement, no dopamine hit, just repetition. And repetition is boring. Boring scares people because boredom feels like stagnation, but boredom is actually stability, and stability is where progress compounds. Motivation creates spikes. Identity creates trends. Spikes look impressive. Trends change lives. Most people live for spike, new plans, new routines, new excitement, and they mistake intensity for progress. High performers ignore spikes. They protect the trend. They care about what happens when nothing exciting is happening. That's when identity shows. Now let's talk about the lie that keeps people dependent on motivation. I'll push harder when I feel inspired again. That sentence delays your future indefinitely because inspiration is random, unreliable, and fleeting. You don't build a life on weather. You build it on structure. Structure doesn't need motivation. It needs obedience. Obedience to your own standards. This is the part people resist because obedience sounds like force, but it's not. It's freedom. When you obey your standards, you stop negotiating with yourself. Negotiation is exhausting. You think you're tired from work? You're tired from deciding the same things over and over. Should I train today? Should I work on this now? Should I push or rest? That constant debate drains you. Standards remove the debate. They tell you what to do, and clarity is energizing. That's why once people build real discipline, their energy returns. Not because they work less, because they think less. Now let's talk about failure, because this is where motivation collapses hardest. Motivation hates failure. One bad day, and it disappears. One missed habit, and it shames you. You messed up. See? You're inconsistent. That voice is motivation turning against you. Identity doesn't do that. Identity expects mistakes. It plans for them. It adjusts. If you miss a day, identity doesn't quit. It resumes. Motivation quits. That's why people relying on motivation restart constantly. And people relying on identity continue. Consistency isn't about never missing. It's about never stopping. Motivation demands perfection. Identity allows progress. Now let's talk about the real enemy, comfort. Motivation dies when comfort becomes easier than effort. And modern life is built for comfort. Instant entertainment, instant food, instant distraction. You're surrounded by things that reward you without effort. Motivation cannot compete with that. It's too weak. That's why people feel inspired and still scroll. The environment wins. High performers don't fight comfort with motivation. They remove access. They reduce friction for good behaviors. They increase friction for bad ones. They don't rely on willpower. They redesign their environment. That's identity in action. You don't feel like doing the right thing. You made it the default. Now here's the most important inversion you need to understand. Motivation is not the cause of action. It's the result of action. Action creates momentum. Momentum creates motivation. You've been waiting for the last step to start the first. That's why nothing moves. High performers move first, even when they feel nothing, especially when they feel nothing. And after a few days of movement, motivation returns. Not as excitement, as confidence. Confidence is quiet, stable, reliable. That's real motivation. Now let's talk about identity at the deepest level. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your standards. Goals are wishes. Standards are rules. Goals ask for effort. Standards demand behavior, and behavior is the only thing that changes outcomes. So instead of asking, how do I stay motivated to work out? You say, I don't miss scheduled training. Instead of, how do I stay motivated to work? You say, I start at the same time every day, regardless of mood. Instead of, how do I stay motivated to improve? You say, I do one uncomfortable thing daily. Those sentences don't sound inspiring. They're not meant to be. They're meant to be enforceable. That's why they work. Now here's where most people mess this up. They try to build 10 standards at once. They overload themselves, then they fail. Then they say, see, discipline doesn't work for me. Discipline failed because you misused it. You only need one standard at a time, one behavior that matters. Protect it, build proof, then add another. Discipline grows like muscle, gradually. Motivation tries to leap, and leaps collapse. Now let's talk about the emotional shift you'll notice. At first, acting without motivation feels mechanical, cold, forced. That's normal, because you're breaking an addiction to feeling ready. After a few weeks, something changes. You stop waiting for feelings. You stop needing permission. You just act, and action starts feeling lighter, not because it's easier, because it's familiar. Familiarity kills resistance. Resistance feeds on novelty. Once action becomes normal, resistance fades. And when resistance fades, motivation becomes irrelevant. That's the goal, not constant excitement. Reliable execution. Now the final challenge. This is not symbolic. This is behavioral. Choose one thing you keep waiting to feel motivated for. 1. Define a standard around it, not a goal, a rule. Example, I write 300 words before checking my phone. I train at 6 p.m. 4 days a week. I make one uncomfortable outreach per workday. Then follow the rule for 21 days, not because you feel like it, because you decided. Track obedience, not results, not feelings, just execution. At the end of 21 days, notice something. Your motivation didn't increase. Your self-trust did. And self-trust is stronger than motivation ever was. If this explains something you've felt for years, leave a comment with one word, standards. And subscribe if you want more of this. Not hype, not inspiration, but systems that work when feelings don't. Because motivation was never meant to last. But discipline built on identity does. And once you stop chasing the feeling, progress finally stops slipping away.